The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps above Elena Vasquez as she pushed her cart down the sterile corridors of Fort Braxton's classified wing. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum, each step echoing the rhythm she'd maintained for the past 18 months, invisible, methodical, forgotten. The cart's wheels wobbled slightly, one bearing loose from years of faithful service, but Elena had grown fond of its imperfections. Like her, it carried on despite being overlooked. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. At 42, Elena had mastered the art of existing in plain sight. Her graying hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, her uniform pressed but faded from countless washings. She moved through the military installation like a ghost, cleaning up after men and women who wielded power she could barely imagine. They saw her hands scrubbing their coffee stains, emptying their trash, but they never saw her eyes that missed nothing. "Morning, Mrs. V," called out Sergeant Jake Morrison from behind his security desk. Unlike the others, Jake had taken the time to learn her name during her first week. He was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a habit of saving her the crossword puzzles from his newspaper. "How's Maria doing with her college applications?" Elena paused, her weathered hands tightening slightly on the cart handle. "She submitted her last one yesterday, MIT for engineering." Pride crept into her voice despite her exhaustion. 17 years old and already building robots that can think. "Like mother, like daughter," Jake said with a genuine smile, but his words carried weight he couldn't possibly understand. As Elena continued her rounds, she passed Colonel Harrison's office. Through the partially open door, she could see him hunched over classified documents, his silver hair catching the morning light. Harrison had been kind to her too, in his own way never dismissive, always nodding when their paths crossed. Sometimes she caught him watching her work with an expression she couldn't quite read, as if he was solving a puzzle he didn't realize existed. The third floor held the communications center, where Major Sarah Chun coordinated intelligence operations across 3 continents. Chun was brilliant. Elena had observed possibly the smartest person in the building. She worked 18-hour days, survived on vending machine coffee, and had a habit of thinking out loud in Mandarin when she was frustrated. Elena understood every word, though she'd never let on. It was Chun's office where the morning's routine would shatter like glass. Elena knocked softly before entering, as she always did. Chun was bent over her computer, dark circles under her eyes suggesting another all-nighter. Classified documents covered every surface, satellite photos, encrypted communications, personnel files marked with security clearances that made Elena's stomach tighten with familiar weight. "Don't mind me, Major," Elena said softly, beginning to empty the wastebaskets. "I'll be quick." Chun barely looked up, waving absently. "Take your time, Mrs. Vasquez. I need to step out anyway." As Chun gathered her files, one slipped from her. Stack a personnel dossier marked with red stamps and warnings. Elena's trained eyes caught the header as it fell. Project Nightingale, Deep Cover Assessment. Below it, a photograph that made her blood run cold. It was her. But not the Elena who cleaned these halls. This was a picture from 15 years ago, her hair darker, her eyes harder, wearing the dress blues of a military officer. Chen retrieved the file quickly, but not before Elena saw the classification level, cosmic clearance required. Only 12 people in the entire Department of Defense held that level of access. Elena had been one of them. "Sorry about that," Chun muttered, but when she looked up, she found Elena staring with an intensity that made her pause. For just a moment, the janitor's careful mask had slipped, revealing something that made Chun's instincts scream warnings. "Mrs. Vasquez, are you all right?" Elena forced her features back into their familiar arrangement of tired servility. "Fine. Major, just thought I recognized someone in the photo." My mistake. But as Chun left the office, Elena noticed she clutched the file closer to her chest. The game, it seemed, was changing. Elena finished her rounds in the communication center with mechanical precision, but her mind was racing through calculations and contingencies she hadn't accessed in years. Project Nightingale had been her creation, her child, her greatest triumph and ultimate destruction. Seeing it resurface now, in files being handled by officers who had no idea what they were dealing with, filled her with a dread that had nothing to do with her own exposure. She made her way to the executive wing, where the real power brokers made decisions that shaped global policy. Here, the carpet was plush, the artwork expensive, and the security cameras more numerous. Elena had memorized every blind spot, every angle, every guard rotation during her months of careful observation. Old habits died hard. General Patricia Hawthorne's office was her final stop of the morning. Hawthorne was a legend, the first woman to reach 4-star rank in special operations, a strategist whose campaigns had prevented 3 wars and ended 2 others with minimal casualties. She was also, Elena knew from careful observation, deeply troubled by something that kept her here until midnight most nights. Elena knocked and entered to find Hawthorne on a secure phone, her voice tight with controlled frustration. "I don't care what the intelligence assessment says, Senator. Something is wrong here. We've lost contact with 3 deep cover assets in the past 6 months. These aren't random casualties. Someone is hunting them systematically." Hawthorne noticed Elena and held up a finger, indicating she'd just be a moment. "No, sir, I cannot provide their identities over this line." "Yes, sir, I understand the political ramifications." Elena began dusting the awards and commendations that lined Hawthorne's walls, but her attention was laser-focused on the conversation. 3 deep cover assets, her people, the children she had recruited, trained, and placed in positions around the globe to be America's invisible guardians. When Hawthorne hung up, she rubbed her temples and looked up at Elena with tired eyes. "Mrs. Vasquez, do you mind if I ask you something personal?" Elena's hand stilled on the frame she was cleaning. "Of course, General. You've been here over a year now. You do excellent work, you're reliable, you never complain. But sometimes I get the feeling that I don't know how to put this." Hawthorne studied Elena's face carefully. "You carry yourself like someone who's seen things. Real things, am I wrong?" For a heartbeat, Elena considered telling her the truth. Patricia Hawthorne was exactly the kind of officer she had once been: brilliant, dedicated, willing to sacrifice everything for the mission. But the cost of that life was written in every line of Elena's face, every gray hair. Every night she'd lain awake, wondering if her daughter was safe from the enemies she'd made. "I've seen enough, General," Elena said quietly, "but not more than anyone else who's lived 42 years on this earth." Hawthorne nodded slowly, but Elena could see she wasn't entirely convinced. "Of course, I'm sorry if that was inappropriate." "Not at all, ma'am. Will there be anything else?" "Actually, yes." Hawthorne pulled out a folder marked with security classifications. "I don't suppose you've ever heard the designation Ghost used in military contexts." Elena's heart stopped, but her hands continued their steady work. "Like the Special Forces Unit?" "I've heard of them on the news. No, not Ghost Recon or any of the publicized units. Something else. Something older and more specialized." Hawthorne was watching Elena's reflection in the glass of a framed photograph. Someone who could disappear completely, become anyone, anywhere, and carry out missions that officially never happened. "Sounds like something from the movies, General," Elena replied, but her voice came out slightly hoarse. "Yes," Hawthorne said thoughtfully. "It does, doesn't it?" Elena finished her cleaning and left Hawthorne's office with her pulse hammering in her ears. Something was happening, something that threatened not just her carefully constructed new life, but the lives of every person she had ever cared about. As she pushed her cart back toward the service elevator, she caught sight of her reflection in a dark window. For just a moment, she didn't see the tired janitor everyone expected. She saw the woman who had once been the most dangerous person in the most dangerous room. No matter which room she entered, the elevator doors closed with a soft chime, sealing Elena in with the weight of 15 years of carefully buried secrets. She had thought her past was dead and buried, that she could live out her days as nothing more than what she appeared to be. But Project Nightingale had been designed to be immortal, and immortal things had a way of resurrecting themselves. As the elevator descended toward the basement where she stored her supplies, Elena made a decision that would change everything. Tonight, she would break into her own files. Elena's apartment existed in the space between worlds, neither fully American nor completely Mexican, neither entirely civilian nor wholly military. The walls were painted a warm terracotta that reminded her of her grandmother's house in Guadalajara, but the furniture was sparse, functional, ready to be abandoned at a moment's notice. Old habits died hard, even after 15 years of trying to kill them. She sat at her kitchen table at 5:30 a.m., as she had every morning for the past 18 months, watching her daughter Maria sleep on the fold-out couch. At 17, Maria was everything Elena had never dared to be at that age: brilliant, confident, unafraid to take up space in the world. Her engineering textbooks were scattered around her pillow like protective talismans, and her laptop displayed the rotating 3D model of a prosthetic hand she was designing for her senior project. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she poured her coffee. The tremor had started 3 years ago, not from age or stress, but from the lingering effects of a nerve agent exposure in Kazakhstan. She'd told the VA doctors it was from cleaning chemicals. Some lies were easier than others. "Mama, you're thinking too loud again," Maria mumbled from the couch, not opening her eyes. At 17, she had already developed the uncanny ability to read her mother's moods from across a room. "Bad dreams? No dreams, Mia. Just work things." Elena settled into the routine of the lie. "Go back to sleep. You don't have school for another hour." But Maria sat up, her dark hair so like Elena's at that age falling around her shoulders. "Métis sent their decision yesterday. The email came after you left for work." Elena's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips, and "I'm in." Maria's grin could have powered the entire building. "Full scholarship, Mama. They want me for their robotics program." The cup slipped from Elena's fingers, shattering against the linoleum floor in a splash of brown liquid and ceramic fragments. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Métis meant visibility. It meant background checks, federal student aid applications, databases that connected to other databases. It meant the possibility that someone might ask why Elena Vasquez, professional janitor, had managed to afford private tutoring for advanced calculus and 3 foreign languages. "Mama, are you okay?" Maria was suddenly beside her, helping to clean up the mess. "I thought you'd be happy." Elena forced her features into an expression of joy, but her mind was running threat assessments. "I am happy, baby. So happy I can't think straight. Métis, my brilliant daughter is going to MIT." As she hugged Maria, Elena's eyes caught sight of the kitchen window. Across the street, a man in a gray sedan had been reading the same newspaper for 27 minutes. Professional surveillance was like a fingerprint. Once you learned to recognize it, you never forgot. After Maria left for school, Elena allowed herself 30 seconds of panic in the privacy of her bedroom. 30 seconds to acknowledge that her carefully constructed world was cracking along fault lines she'd tried to seal with ordinary life. Then she stood, straightened her uniform, and prepared to do what she had always done: adapt and survive. Bus ride to Fort Braxton was a study in controlled observation. Elena had long ago memorized the morning routines of her fellow passengers: the nurses heading to the base hospital, the civilian contractors with their security badges and tired eyes, The young soldiers fresh from basic training who still believed. They were invincible. Today, she noted 3 new faces and 1 regular passenger who wasn't on his usual seat. Small anomalies that might mean nothing or everything dotted the base entrance. Security Specialist Davis waved her through the employee checkpoint with his usual barely there acknowledgement. But Elena caught the way his eyes lingered on her ID badge. A fraction of a second longer than usual, the slight tightness around his mouth that suggested he'd been given instructions he didn't fully understand. "Morning, Mrs. V," Davis said, his voice carrying a forced casualness that made Elena's instincts scream. "How's the family?" Elena had been asked about her family perhaps twice in 18 months. The sudden interest felt like a spotlight in a room full of shadows. "Good, thank you. Maria got into MIT yesterday." "MIT, wow, smart kid. Must get it from her mom." Davis's smile didn't reach his eyes, and Elena realized with crystalline clarity that her cover was not just compromised. It was being actively investigated. She made her way to the supply closet with deliberate calm, but her mind was racing. Through extraction protocols she'd hoped never to use again. How much did they know? How much time did she have? Most importantly, was Maria safe? Her reflection stared back at her from the supply closet's small mirror, and for a moment, Elena allowed herself to remember who she had been. Colonel Elena Maria Santos, not Vasquez. That was her ex-husband's name, adopted for the life she'd built after had been recruited into Project Nightingale at 27, the youngest officer ever selected for deep cover operations. She'd spent 15 years becoming other people so completely that she sometimes forgot her original self. A diplomat's daughter in Prague, a relief worker in Somalia, a tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, a museum curator in Istanbul. Each identity had been perfect, flawless, undetectable. The woman in the mirror now bore little resemblance to any of those carefully crafted personas. This Elena was tired, weathered, marked by years of manual labor and single motherhood. But under the surface, the same mind that had once coordinated intelligence operations across 4 continents was calculating odds and planning contingencies. She began her rounds with mechanical precision, but every movement was now purposeful in ways her coworkers couldn't imagine. As she cleaned Colonel Harrison's office, she noted the new security camera in the corner installed, according to the work order still on his desk, just 3 days ago. In Major Chun's communications center, she observed that 2 workstations had been reassigned to officers she didn't recognize, their clearance badges marked with designations she'd seen only once before. Internal affairs, but it was in General Hawthorne's office that Elena found confirmation of her worst fears. Hawthorne was in a meeting with 2 men Elena didn't recognize, but their bearing and the way they held themselves told her everything she needed to know. Intelligence officers. Not military intelligence, something deeper, darker, with the kind of authority that made generals listen carefully. The trail went cold in Mexico City, one of them was saying as Elena began dusting the far side of the office. But we have reason to believe she's still in the continental United States, possibly using the name Vasquez. Elena's hand stilled on the picture frame she was cleaning, a photograph of Hawthorne receiving the Medal of Honor for actions in Afghanistan. The same operation where Elena had spent 6 months embedded with Taliban leadership, feeding intelligence. That had saved hundreds of American lives. "Colonel Santos was the best we ever had," Hawthorne replied quietly. "If she doesn't want to be found, you're not going to find her. The question is, why are you looking?" She completed her service honorably and earned her retirement. "Because 3 of her former assets are dead, and we think she might be next." The second man leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of classified information. "Someone is systematically hunting down everyone connected to Project Nightingale. We need to bring her in for her own protection." "Protection or interrogation?" Hawthorne's tone had sharpened. "Because in my experience, Those two things look very different from the inside. Elena forced herself to continue dusting, but her mind was racing. 3 assets dead, her people. Jason in Berlin had always been too trusting. Susan in Bangkok had let sentiment cloud her judgment. Marcus in São Paulo had gotten married, given someone leverage over him. She had trained them to be invisible, but she had also trained them to be human. Humanity, as she had learned too late, was both their greatest strength and their fatal weakness. The meeting continued, but Elena had heard enough. She finished her cleaning and left Hawthorne's office with the careful, shuffling gait of a woman whose feet hurt from standing all day. But inside, she was already 3 moves ahead, calculating escape routes and false identities, emergency funds and safe houses. She had one advantage. They were looking for Colonel Elena Santos, the ghost who could become anyone. They weren't looking for Elena Vasquez, the janitor who was hiding in plain sight among the very people who were hunting her. But advantages were fragile things, and Elena knew better than most how quickly the hunter could become the hunted. As she pushed her cart through the corridors of Fort Braxton, Elena made peace with the truth she had been avoiding for 18 months. She could not remain invisible forever. The past had found her, as she had always known it would. The only question now was whether she would run and spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, or whether she would stand and fight on terms of her own choosing. The woman who had once been the most dangerous person in any room was about to remind the world why ghosts were things to be feared, not hunted. The first sign of active surveillance came during Elena's lunch break. She sat in her usual spot, a bench near the commissary, with clear sight lines in 3 directions, eating the same peanut butter sandwich she brought every day. Routine was camouflage, predictability was protection. But today the pattern was broken by small things that screamed danger to eyes trained to see. The fluorescent lights in the medical bay flickered with that familiar hum that had become the soundtrack to Staff Sergeant Maya Chun's nights at Forward Operating Base Blackwater. At 0347 hours, the silence was deceptive, a false calm that preceded the storm of wounded soldiers who would inevitably flood through those double doors. She methodically checked her supplies for the 3rd time that night, her calloused fingers moving with practiced precision across bandages, sutures, and morphine vials. Each item had its place, just as she had found hers in this concrete tomb buried in the Afghan desert. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya's reflection caught in the stainless steel cabinet door, angular features softened by exhaustion, dark hair pulled back in regulation style, brown eyes that had seen too much but still held an ember of determination. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every stripe on her sleeve through blood, sweat, and an unwavering commitment to keeping others alive. The medic's cross on her uniform seemed to glow under the harsh lighting, a symbol that had become both her identity and her shield. Another quiet night, Chun. Corporal Jake Martinez emerged from the supply room, his boyish grin a welcome interruption to the sterile atmosphere. At 22, Jake still possessed the kind of optimism that the desert hadn't yet beaten out of him. His friendship had become one of the few bright spots in Maya's deployment, a reminder that humanity could flourish even in the darkest corners of the world. "You know what they say about quiet nights," Maya replied, allowing herself a small smile. "The moment you acknowledge them, all hell breaks loose." She continued her inventory, muscle memory guiding her hands while her mind wandered to the letter she'd received from her sister that morning. Elena was getting married next spring, and Maya had promised to be the maid of honor. The thought of wearing a dress and pretending everything was normal felt as foreign as the landscape outside these walls. The medical bay at FOB Blackwater was Maya's domain, a sterile sanctuary where rank mattered less than skill and where she had saved more lives than she cared to count. The walls bore the invisible stains of countless emergencies. The 19-year-old private who'd stepped on an IED during his first patrol. The seasoned sergeant who'd taken shrapnel to protect his squad. The Afghan interpreter whose loyalty had cost him 3 fingers and nearly his life. Each case had left its mark on Maya's soul, adding weight to the burden she carried with stoic grace. "Doc Chun, you ever think about what you'll do when you get back to the world?" Martinez asked, using the affectionate nickname the soldiers had given her despite her enlisted status. He was organizing medical supplies with the meticulous care she'd taught him, his movements reflecting the growth he'd shown over their 8-month deployment. Maya paused, considering the question that haunted her quiet moments. Home felt like a concept rather than a place. Her apartment in Colorado Springs, her job at the civilian hospital, her old life where the most dangerous thing she encountered was a difficult 4-stick. "Honestly, Jake, I'm not sure I remember how to be anything other than this." She gestured to the medical bay around them, her voice carrying a weight that belied her years. The truth was more complex than she could articulate. Before her deployment, Maya had been restless, feeling like she was operating at half capacity in her civilian role. The Army had given her purpose, but it had also revealed capabilities she'd never known she possessed. Her medical training was just one layer of her skill set. Beneath the surface lay something harder, sharper, forged in places she couldn't discuss even with those closest to her. "My grandfather was career military," Martinez offered, settling into one of the plastic chairs that furnished their break area. "He used to say that some people are born for the fight, and others find it when they need it most. Says he could always tell the difference." His young face grew serious, the weight of their shared experiences aging him beyond his years. Maya's thoughts drifted to her own grandfather, a Marine who'd served in Vietnam and never spoke about what he'd seen. He'd been the one to encourage her military service, recognizing something in her that others missed. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man," she said, though her mind was elsewhere, remembering training that went far beyond basic medical protocols. The radio crackled to life, causing both medics to freeze. "Blackwater Medical, this is Tower 1. We've got movement on the perimeter, possible incoming wounded. Stand by for further instructions." The voice belonged to Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, their communication specialist, and the tension in his words was unmistakable. "Roger that, Tower 1, medical standing by," Maya responded, her transformation instant and complete. The contemplative woman disappeared, replaced by a combat medic whose reputation had spread throughout the base. She began pulling additional supplies, her movements economical and precise. Martinez followed her lead without question, their partnership refined through months of shared crisis. As they prepared for what might come, Maya's fingers unconsciously traced the small scar on her left wrist, a memento from training she'd never officially received, in a program that didn't officially exist. The muscle memory was still there, dormant but ready, like a coiled spring waiting for the right pressure to release its energy. She'd been many things in her 28 years: daughter, sister, student, medic, soldier. But there were aspects of her identity that remained classified, buried beneath layers of secrecy and misdirection. The medical bay fell into focused silence, broken only by the hum of equipment and the distant sound of generators keeping their isolated outpost running. Maya had learned to find peace in these moments of anticipation, using them to center herself for whatever challenges lay ahead. Her training had taught her that preparation was everything, not just the physical arrangement of supplies, but the mental and emotional readiness to face whatever human suffering might walk through those doors. "Doc, can I ask you something personal?" Martinez's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Maya nodded, continuing her preparations while listening. "You're different from the other medics I've worked with. There's something, I don't know, harder about you. Not in a bad way." He added quickly, "It's just that sometimes you move like Like you've had training none of us know about. Maya's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. It wasn't the first time someone had noticed, and it wouldn't be the last. The challenge was always finding the right balance between capability and concealment, between being effective and being invisible. "We all have our secrets, Jake," she said finally. "The important thing is using whatever skills we have to do the job in front of us." The young corporal seemed satisfied with her non-answer, or perhaps he understood that some doors weren't meant to be opened. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside, heavy boots moving with authority and purpose. Maya's posture shifted slightly, an almost imperceptible change that spoke to instincts honed through experiences she couldn't name. Colonel James Richter appeared in the doorway, his imposing frame filling the space with an authority that seemed to demand attention. At 53, he was career military through and through, with silver hair cropped to regulation standards and pale blue eyes that missed nothing. His chest bore the ribbons and decorations of a man who'd spent 3 decades climbing the ladder of military hierarchy, each promotion earned through a combination of competence, connections, and careful political maneuvering. "Staff Sergeant Chun," he said, his voice carrying the kind of casual authority that came naturally to men accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I need to speak with you about the medical supplies inventory. There seems to be a discrepancy in the morphine counts that requires immediate attention." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach, though her expression remained professionally neutral. The morphine inventory had been perfect. She'd checked it herself 3 times. But questioning a colonel's statement wasn't just inadvisable. It could be career-ending. "Of course, sir. Corporal Martinez, would you mind checking on the equipment maintenance logs?" Martinez glanced between Maya and the colonel, some instinct warning him that the atmosphere had shifted. "Yes, Doc, I'll be in the equipment bay if you need me." He gathered his supplies and left, though Maya noticed the reluctance in his movements. Good soldiers develop survival instincts, and Jake's were telling him that something wasn't right. As the door closed behind Martinez, Maya found herself alone with Colonel Richter in the sterile confines of the medical bay. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter now, casting sharp shadows that emphasized the angular lines of the colonel's face. He stepped deeper into the room, his movements deliberate and predatory in a way that made Maya's training whisper warnings she hoped she wouldn't need to heed. As she left the conference room, Elena made a decision that would have horrified the woman she'd been 18 months ago. She was going to break her own cardinal rule and trust someone. She found Major Chun in the communications center, hunched over her computer with the same intense focus she brought to everything. Elena knocked softly and entered, noting that Chun looked up with eyes that were sharper than usual, more alert. "Mrs. Vasquez, working late today?" "Major, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." Elena closed the door behind her and turned the lock, a detail that made Chun's hand drift instinctively toward her service weapon. "Earlier today, you had a file that fell from your stack. A file about Project Nightingale." Chun's expression went carefully blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And you've been thinking about it all day, running scenarios, asking yourself why a janitor would recognize classified project names." Elena moved closer, and Chun could see that the tired, subservient woman had been replaced by something harder, more dangerous. "I'm going to tell you something that could get us both killed, but I need you to understand the stakes." "Mrs. Vasquez, I think you should. My name is Colonel Elena Maria Santos, former commander of Project Nightingale Deep Cover Operations. 3 of my people are dead. Someone is hunting the rest of us, and they're using my daughter as leverage to force my cooperation. I need your help." Chun's hand was now resting on her weapon, but her eyes were calculating rather than afraid. "Prove it." Elena rattled off Chun's service record from memory, her MIT doctorate in electrical engineering, her tour in Afghanistan working on battlefield communications, her current project developing quantum encrypted satellite networks. She knew Chun's birthday, her mother's maiden name, and the classified details of an operation in Syria that had saved a dozen American lives. Jesus Christ, Chun breathed. You're really her. You're actually Elena Santos. I'm really her. And I'm asking for your help, not as a janitor to a major, but as one intelligence officer to another. Because I think you've figured out what I just learned. This isn't just about bringing me in for protection. Someone is cleaning house, eliminating everyone who knows about Nightingale, including the people trying to find me. Chun was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. The communication intercepts we've been tracking, the ones that suggested insider knowledge of our operations, you think they're connected? I know they are. Nightingale was designed to be completely compartmentalized. No one knew the full scope except me and my immediate superior. If someone is systematically hunting my people, they have access to information that should be impossible to obtain. Your immediate superior? Elena's expression darkened. Deputy Director Richard Kane, officially retired 3 years ago. Unofficially, he still has his fingers in every Black Ops program in the intelligence community. Chun's eyes widened. Kane is running the investigation to find you. He's the one who brought the files to General Hawthorne. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Kane wasn't trying to protect her. He was cleaning up loose ends, eliminating everyone who could expose Project Nightingale's darker operations. Elena had always known too much, and now that knowledge had become a liability. Major, I need you to get me 5 minutes alone with a secure terminal. Can you do that? Chun hesitated for exactly 3 seconds, then nodded. There's a maintenance window at 2,100 hours. I can give you access to the system, but after that, you're on your own. That's all I need, thank you. As Elena left the communications center, she felt the familiar weight of operational planning settling over her shoulders like an old coat. She was no longer Elena Vasquez, the janitor who wanted nothing more than to see her daughter succeed. She was Colonel Elena Santos, and she was going to war. But first, she had to get Maria to safety. The drive home took twice as long as usual, as Elena employed every surveillance detection route she remembered. She was being followed a black SUV that stayed exactly 4 cars back, a motorcycle that appeared at 3 different intersections, a white van that she'd seen parked outside the base that morning. They were good, but she was better. She arrived at her apartment building to find Maria working at the kitchen table, her laptop displaying complex engineering diagrams that reminded Elena painfully of her own tactical planning software. Mama, you're home early. Is everything okay? Elena sat down across from her daughter, seeing her own eyes reflected in Maria's face. Mia, I need you to listen to me very carefully. We need to leave. Tonight. Leave? What are you talking about? Pack 1 bag with only essential items. We're going to visit your Aunt Carmen in Phoenix. It's a surprise trip. Maria's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Mama, you're scaring me. What's happening? Elena reached across the table and took her daughter's hands. They were soft, unmarked by violence or deception, capable of creating beautiful things, rather than destroying them. Everything Elena had sacrificed for 15 years had been to keep those hands clean. I haven't been entirely honest with you about my past. Before you were born, I had a different job. A dangerous job. That job has followed us here, and now we need to go somewhere safe until I can fix it. What kind of job? Elena met her daughter's eyes and saw her own determination reflected there. Maria was 17, brilliant, and deserved more truth than Elena had ever given her. I was a soldier, baby. A special kind of soldier who worked in places where wars were fought in shadows instead of battlefields. I thought that life was behind me, but it's not. And now I need to protect you the only way I know how." Maria was quiet for a long moment, processing information that recontextualized 18 years of carefully constructed normalcy. "Are we in danger?" "We could be, I don't know yet. But I won't take chances with your safety." "Okay." Maria's voice was steady, strong. "How long do I have to pack?" Elena felt a surge of pride, so intense it almost brought tears to her eyes. Her daughter, her brilliant, brave daughter, was facing the unknown with the same calm courage Elena had once brought to impossible missions. 20 minutes. "And Maria, I'm proud of you. So proud." As Maria packed, Elena made preparations that would have looked mundane to casual observation, but were, in fact, the opening moves in a chess game where the stakes were life and death. She retrieved emergency cash hidden in 3 different locations, loaded a go-bag she'd hoped never to use, and sent a coded message to a number she'd memorized 15 years ago. The message was simple: "Ghost to base. Package compromised. Requesting immediate extraction protocol 7. If the numbers still worked, if the protocols were still active, help would come. If not, she and Maria were on their own against forces that had already killed 3 of the best operatives she'd ever trained. Either way, Elena Santos was no longer hiding. As they left the apartment building through the service entrance, Elena caught sight of the surveillance team scrambling to reposition. They had expected her to run, but they hadn't expected her to run toward the danger instead of away from it. The game had begun, and Elena Santos had just made the opening move. The safe house was a nondescript ranch home in suburban Alexandria, Virginia, the kind of place where soccer moms drove minivans, and the biggest scandal was someone forgetting to bring cookies to the bake sale. Elena had purchased it through a shell corporation in 2008, one of 6 emergency bolt holes she'd established during her active years. She'd hoped never to use any of them. Maria sat on the unfamiliar couch, her laptop balanced on her knees, trying to make sense of a world that had shifted fundamentally in the space of a 6-hour drive. Elena watched her daughter adapt with the same methodical intelligence she brought to engineering problems, breaking down the impossible into manageable components. "So the janitor thing was just a cover?" Maria asked, not looking up from her screen. "Not exactly. I really was cleaning those offices, really did take pride in doing good work. But yes, it was also the perfect place to hide." Elena was disassembling and checking the Glock 19 with the muscle memory of decades. No one looks twice at service staff. We're invisible by design, but you were watching them. The officers, the staff, you were gathering intelligence. Elena paused. In her weapon maintenance, "You're very smart." "I'm your daughter. Of course I'm smart." Maria looked up, and Elena saw steel in her eyes that hadn't been there that morning. "What else haven't you told me?" Before Elena could answer, her secure phone buzzed with an incoming message. The response to her earlier request: "Ghost confirmed. Package will be retrieved. Stand by for contact." "Someone's coming to help us," Elena said. But Maria was already shaking her head. "No, Mama, someone's coming to help you. I'm not part of this world." Maria closed her laptop and stood up, pacing the small living room with restless energy. My scholarship, my whole future, that's all leverage against you, isn't it?" Elena's silence was answer enough. "So what happens now? Do I disappear too? Become someone else? Give up everything I've worked for because of choices you made before I was born?" The accusation hung in the air between them, and Elena felt the weight of every decision that had brought them to this moment. She had tried to build a life separate from the shadows, but shadows had a way of consuming everything they touched. "I won't let that happen," Elena said quietly. "Whatever it costs, I won't let your life be destroyed by mine." A soft knock at the front door interrupted them. 3 quick raps, followed by 2, followed by 1. Elena recognized the pattern and felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. After 15 years, Jason Coughlin looked older, grayer, but he still moved with the predatory grace of a man who had survived operations that officially never happened. Elena. Jason's voice carried decades of shared history, victories and losses that had forged bonds stronger than family. You look good for someone who's supposed to be dead, Jason. Elena holstered her weapon but didn't completely relax. Trust was earned daily in their world, never permanent. How many of us are left? Fewer than there were a week ago. Marcus. Got hit in São Paulo. Car bomb, very professional. Susan in Bangkok, made to look like a robbery. Jason in Berlin. He stopped, realizing the confusion. Different Jason. Berlin asset. Sniper, single shot, no witnesses. Elena felt each death like a physical blow. These had been her people, her responsibility. She had recruited them, trained them, sent them into situations where failure meant death. That they had survived active operations only to be hunted down. In retirement was a betrayal that cut deeper than any wound she'd taken in the field. Kane? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Deputy Director Richard Kane, yes. But he's not working alone. We've identified at least 3 contract teams, military-grade equipment, access to real-time intelligence feeds. This isn't some rogue operation. It's sanctioned at the highest levels. Maria had been listening from the kitchen doorway, her engineering mind processing the conversation like data points in an equation. You're talking about the U.S. government hunting down its own people. Jason looked at Elena with raised eyebrows. She knows? She knows enough. Maria, this is Jason Coughlin. He taught me half of what I know about staying alive. The other half she figured out on her own, Jason said with something approaching paternal pride. Your mother was the best of us, kid. The absolute best. Elena felt uncomfortable with the praise was past tense. I've been out of the game for 15 years. Maybe, but someone thinks you're still a threat, or they wouldn't be burning this much resources to eliminate you. Jason pulled out a tablet and showed Elena satellite photos of her apartment building. They hit your place 6 hours after you left. Professional search, but they tore it apart looking for something specific. Elena studied the images, noting the systematic destruction. Intelligence files. They think I kept copies of operational records. Did you? Elena's smile was sharp as broken glass. Of course I did. Insurance policy. But not where they're looking. Where? Elena looked at Maria, who was following the conversation. With the intense focus she usually reserved for complex engineering problems. Her daughter's world had already been turned upside down. There was no point in half measures now. In plain sight. Every janitor has access to places others can't go, sees things others can't see. 18 months of observation, documented patterns, recorded conversations, photographed documents. I've been building a case file without realizing it. Jason's expression shifted from concern to something approaching awe. You've been conducting surveillance on your own former colleagues. I've been cleaning their offices and paying attention. There's a difference. Elena moved to the window, checking sight lines and escape routes with automatic precision. But yes, I know who's been meeting with whom, which projects are running over budget, which operations are being discussed in rooms that aren't supposed to exist. Jesus, Elena, you're sitting on the biggest intelligence treasure trove in the history of the program. I'm sitting on evidence of crimes, Jason. War crimes, constitutional violations, operations that would destroy careers and collapse governments if they ever saw daylight. Elena's voice carried the weight of accumulated knowledge. That's why. They want me dead. Not because I'm a threat to operational security, because I'm a threat to powerful people who thought their secrets were safe. Maria stepped forward, her young face serious with newfound understanding. That's why you became a janitor. Not to hide, to watch. Elena met her daughter's eyes and saw recognition there, the dawning awareness of who her mother really was beneath the carefully constructed facade. I thought I was retiring, Nia, but old habits die hard. And when you put a trained intelligence officer in the middle of a military installation, even as a janitor. She shrugged. You get intelligence. The secure phone buzzed again, this time with an emergency alert. Jason checked it and swore under his breath. They found your car. Alexandria PD is reporting it as stolen, but the description went out on federal channels. We've got maybe an hour before they triangulate to this location. Elena was already moving, gathering documents and equipment with the efficient speed of someone who had evacuated safe houses before. Maria, pack your laptop. And anything you can't replace. We're moving again. Where are we going? Somewhere they'll never think to look for us. Elena's smile was enigmatic. Back to the source. 30 minutes later, they were in Jason's modified Honda Civic, a vehicle that looked completely ordinary, but contained enough electronic countermeasures to confuse a satellite tracking system. As they drove through the Virginia countryside, Elena outlined a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. Fort Braxton is the last place they'll expect us to go. They think I'm running, trying to get as far away as possible. Instead, we're going back to retrieve the evidence I've been collecting. That's suicide, Jason said flatly. The base is locked down, security increased, every entrance monitored. Every official entrance, yes. But I've been cleaning that building for 18 months. I know every service tunnel, every maintenance access, every blind spot in their surveillance network. Elena's voice carried absolute confidence. More importantly, I know their routines. Tuesday night is when they run full system diagnostics on the security grid. For 47 minutes, the basement levels rely on manual patrols only. 47 minutes to get in, retrieve your files, and get out. 47 minutes to end this once and for all. Elena looked back at Maria, who was staring out the window at the darkening landscape. But first, we need to get Maria somewhere safe. No. Maria's voice was quiet, but firm. I'm not running away while you risk your life to clean up the past. If this is about protecting me, then I have a say in how we do it. Nia, this isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment they decided to use my future as leverage against you. Maria turned to face her mother, and Elena saw her own determination reflected in her daughter's eyes. Besides, you might need an engineer. Jason looked between mother and daughter and saw the family resemblance that went deeper than genetics. She's got a point. Security systems are just engineering problems when you break them down to components. Elena felt a mixture of pride and terror at the thought of involving Maria in an operation this dangerous. But she also recognized the truth in her daughter's words. This fight was about Maria's future as much as Elena's past. If we do this, we do it my way. Complete operational discipline, no questions, no hesitation. This isn't a movie, and heroes don't always survive. Understood, Maria said, with a seriousness that made her sound much older than 17. Jason, I need you to make contact with the others. Find out who's still alive, who we can trust. If we're going to expose this conspiracy, we need more than just my evidence. Already done. Rebecca in London is secure. Thomas in Auckland has gone dark. But we think he's alive. David in Montreal, unclear. Elena processed the information, calculating odds and possibilities. 3 confirmed deaths, 3 possible survivors. Not good odds, but better than complete annihilation. We need to move fast. Once they realize I'm not running, they'll figure out what I'm really doing. Elena checked her watch. 16 hours until the next maintenance window. We used that time to prepare. As they drove toward a destiny none of them could fully predict, Elena allowed herself one moment of doubt. 18 months ago, she had believed her war was over, that she could live quietly and watch her daughter build a future uncontaminated by the shadows of the past. Now she was about to pull Maria directly into those shadows, gambling everything, on a mission that could either free them both or destroy them completely. But as she watched, Maria studying building schematics on her laptop with the same intense focus she brought to robotics problems, Elena realized something important. Her daughter wasn't just a victim to be protected. She was a full partner in this fight, with skills and perspectives that Elena couldn't provide alone. For the first time in 15 years, Colonel Elena Santos was going back to war. But this time, she wasn't fighting alone. The Honda disappeared into the Virginia night, carrying 3 people toward a confrontation that would determine whether Project Nightingale's secrets died with its operatives, or whether the truth would finally see the light of day. In her communications center at Fort Braxton, Major Sarah Chun stared at her computer screen, wrestling with a decision that could define the rest of her career. Elena Santos had asked for her help, and everything Chun had discovered since suggested that help was desperately needed. The question was whether she had the courage to act on that knowledge. Chun pulled up the classified files she'd been reviewing, cross-referencing operational budgets with personnel movements, communication logs with suspicious deaths. The pattern was undeniable once you knew how to look for it. Project Nightingale was being systematically erased, its people eliminated, its records destroyed. But Elena Santos wasn't just another target. She was the architect of the entire program, the woman who had built America's most successful deep cover operation from nothing. If she was fighting back, she had a plan. And if she had a plan, Chun wanted to be part of it. Chun made her decision and began typing a message that would either save lives or end her career. Sometimes, those were the only choices that mattered. General Patricia Hawthorne received the message at 0347 hours, in the secure study of her base quarters. As she read Chun's carefully coded intelligence assessment, her expression shifted from confusion to anger to grim determination. She had suspected something was wrong with the Santos investigation, but seeing the evidence laid out in black and white made her blood run cold. 3 operatives dead in 3 different countries, all killed by methods that suggested professional assassins with access to classified information. Background searches conducted without proper authorization. Surveillance operations running parallel to official channels. And at the center of it all, Deputy Director Richard Kane, a man whose retirement had been more fiction than fact. Hawthorne had earned her 4 stars by knowing when to follow orders and when to follow her conscience. Tonight, conscience was winning. She picked up her secure phone and began making calls that would change everything. The maintenance tunnels beneath Fort Braxton were a world unto themselves, a maze of concrete corridors, utility pipes, and forgotten storage rooms that existed in the gaps between official blueprints. Elena moved through them with the confidence of someone who had spent 18 months mapping every junction, every access point, every possible route to anywhere that mattered. Maria followed close behind, her laptop strapped to her back and her engineering mind cataloging the infrastructure around them. She had downloaded the base's public architectural plans and was mentally overlaying them with the reality of their underground passage, noting discrepancies that spoke to decades of modifications and expansions. The security grid cycling should begin in 6 minutes, Elena whispered into her throat mic. Above them, Jason was positioned in a stolen maintenance van, monitoring radio frequencies and providing overwatch. Status report. All quiet on the perimeter. No unusual activity, no additional patrols. Either they're very confident or they're waiting for you to make the first move. Elena suspected the latter. Richard Kane hadn't survived 30 years in intelligence by being overconfident. He was letting her come to him, probably hoping she would expose herself, attempting to retrieve evidence that he believed he had already neutralized. He was about to learn why assumptions were dangerous things in their business. There, Elena pointed to a service hatch marked with warnings about electrical hazards. That's our access point to the basement storage level. The servers I need are in room B47, right under Major Chun's communication center. How do you know they haven't moved the servers? Because moving classified data storage requires paperwork, authorization, and oversight. Bureaucracy is the one constant in military operations. Elena began working on the hatch lock with tools. That looked like standard maintenance equipment, but had been modified for purposes the manufacturers never intended. Besides, I may have encouraged certain inefficiencies in their filing system over the past few months. Maria watched her mother work with tools and techniques that transformed her from a janitor into something much more dangerous. You've been sabotaging their operations? I've been ensuring that certain information remained accessible to someone with the right knowledge and access. The lock clicked open, and Elena smiled with satisfaction. Subtle, deniable, but effective. They dropped into the basement storage level, a climate-controlled environment filled with servers, backup systems, and archived materials that represented decades of accumulated secrets. Elena navigated the rows of equipment with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. Here. She stopped in front of a server rack that looked identical to dozens of others. This is where they store overflow data from. Operational communications. Officially, it's just routine backup storage. Unofficially, it's where deleted files go to die. Elena connected a device that looked like a standard diagnostic tool, but was actually a sophisticated data extraction system. 18 months of deleted emails, erased documents, purged communication logs, everything they thought was safely destroyed. Including evidence of the murders, including communications between Kane and his contract teams, financial transfers to offshore accounts, and operational planning documents that will prove this conspiracy goes all the way to the top. Elena watched the progress bar crawl across her device's screen, 73% complete. Above them, the building remained quiet, but Elena's instincts were screaming warnings. The operation was going too smoothly, the security too lax. Either they were extremely lucky, or they were walking into a trap. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from Jason. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south. Military escort, VIP transport. Someone important is coming to the party. Elena checked her watch. We need 2 more minutes for the download to complete. Mama, we might not have 2 minutes. But Elena was already smiling, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Actually, we might have exactly what we need. Maria, change of plans. We're not just retrieving evidence, we're delivering it. As the download completed, Elena heard the distinctive sound of footsteps in the corridor above multiple people, moving with purpose. She grabbed Maria's hand and led her deeper into the storage facility, toward a junction that connected to the building's main ventilation system. Where are we going? To the communications center. If someone important is here for a meeting, I want to know what they're saying. And more importantly, I want them to know that I'm listening. They climbed through a ventilation shaft that brought them to a maintenance space directly above Major Chun's office. Through the grating, Elena could see the communication center buzzing with activity, more people than she'd ever seen there during night shift. All of them focused on terminals displaying information that made her blood run cold, real-time tracking. Data for 6 different targets around the globe. Her remaining operatives, their locations pinpointed with military precision. She wasn't the only one being hunted tonight. This was a coordinated global operation designed to eliminate every person who had ever worked for Project Nightingale. Jesus, Maria whispered. They're going to kill all of them. Elena was already moving, dropping silently into the communication center through an access panel she had noticed months ago, but never thought she would use. The 2 technicians on duty barely had time to register her presence before she rendered them unconscious, with techniques that left no permanent damage but ensured their silence. Maria, I need you to access the communication system. Can you do that? Give me 30 seconds. Maria's fingers flew across the keyboard with the same precision she brought to engineering problems. "I'm in. What do you want to send?" "A message that's going to change everything." Elena began typing rapidly, crafting a communication that would be received simultaneously by every major intelligence agency in the world, every news organization with the security clearance to verify its authenticity, and every member of Congress with oversight authority for black operations. The message was simple, devastating, and impossible to ignore. Project Nightingale evidence package attached. 18 months of surveillance data proving systematic murder of retired U.S. intelligence operatives by Deputy Director Richard Kane and associated contractors. Immediate protection requested for remaining assets worldwide. Colonel Elena Santos, reporting for duty. As the message transmitted, Elena attached the complete data package she had retrieved from the server's communications. Financial records, operational plans, and video surveillance that painted a complete picture of the conspiracy that had been hunting her people. "Message sent," Maria reported. "Every major intelligence oversight committee just received everything." "Good." Now the communication center door burst open, and Deputy Director Richard Kane entered with a security team that moved with military precision. Elena found herself looking at the man who had shaped her career, trained her in the arts of deception and assassination, and was now trying to eliminate her and everyone she had ever cared about. Kane was older, grayer, but his eyes still held the cold intelligence that had made him one of the most feared men in the shadow world. "Colonel Elena Santos. Or should I say Mrs. Vasquez? You've led us quite a chase." "Richard." Elena stepped protectively in front of Maria, but her voice remained calm. "You're looking well for someone who's supposed to be retired. Retirement is for people who don't have unfinished business." Kane gestured to his security team, who spread out to cover all the exits. "You've caused me considerable trouble. Elena, 3 teams of contractors, 18 months of surveillance, and now you've forced me to accelerate my timeline. Your timeline for murdering everyone who ever worked for you. My timeline for protecting national security from people who know too much about operations that could destabilize governments if they ever became public." Kane's expression was genuinely regretful. "You were the best, Elena, the absolute best. But you also know more than anyone else about things that need to stay buried. Like the fact that Project Nightingale was used for illegal assassinations, or that you've been running unsanctioned operations for private contractors, or maybe the part where you've been selling classified intelligence to foreign governments." Kane's facade of regret slipped, revealing the predator beneath. "You don't understand the larger picture. The work we do exists in gray areas that official oversight could never comprehend. Sometimes, protecting America means protecting it from its own ignorance. And sometimes, protecting America means exposing people who think they're above the law." Elena heard footsteps in the corridor, multiple people moving fast, including people who murder their own operatives to cover up their crimes. The communication center erupted in chaos as the door burst open again, this time admitting General Hawthorne, Major Chun, and a full security detail wearing the distinctive insignia of the Army's Criminal Investigation Division. "Deputy Director Kane, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and treason," Hawthorne announced with military authority. "Colonel Santos, stand down. You're under federal protection." Kane's security team found themselves outnumbered and outgunned by soldiers who had been briefed on the situation and were prepared for resistance. The standoff lasted exactly 30 seconds before professional judgment overcame personal loyalty, and weapons were lowered. "You have no authority here," Kane said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I do." Hawthorne held up a document marked with official seals. "As of 1 hour ago, I've been granted emergency oversight authority for all Project Nightingale personnel and operations. Your little cleanup operation just became a federal investigation. Elena felt 15 years of tension leaving her shoulders as she realized the nightmare was finally over. The others? My people overseas? Secure. We reached them in time. Major. Chung stepped forward with a tablet showing global communications. Rebecca in London, Thomas in Auckland, David in Montreal, all safe, all under protection. How? Your evidence package was very comprehensive, Hawthorne said, with something approaching approval. Once we knew who was hunting them and how, it was relatively simple to intervene. As Kane was led away in handcuffs, Elena pulled Maria close and felt her daughter's arms around her in return. 18 months of careful deception had ended in 47 minutes of truth, but the cost had been measured in years of separation from who she really was. So what happens now? Maria asked. Elena looked at General Hawthorne, who was consulting with Major Chun about securing the communications equipment. She looked at her daughter, whose engineering mind was already processing the possibilities of a future that was no longer constrained by hidden threats. She looked at her own hands, no longer trembling with the memory of nerve agent exposure, steady with the knowledge that her people were safe. Now we rebuild, Elena said quietly. But this time, we do it in the light. 6 months later, Elena Santos stood in the hearing room of the Senate Intelligence Committee, raising her right hand to swear an oath to tell the truth about operations that had been hidden in shadows for decades. The committee members, some sympathetic, some hostile, all intensely curious, prepared to hear testimony that would reshape America's understanding of its intelligence apparatus. State your name for the record. Colonel Elena Maria Santos, United States Army, retired. Former commander of Project Nightingale deep cover operations. Colonel Santos, in your own words, please describe the scope and purpose of Project Nightingale. Elena looked out at the packed hearing room, noting the journalists, the family members of deceased operatives, the government officials whose careers would be defined by what happened in this room. In the gallery, she saw Maria sitting next to Jason Coughlin, both of them wearing expressions of quiet pride. Project Nightingale was designed to place highly trained intelligence operatives in deep cover positions around the world, where they could gather information and conduct operations that traditional diplomatic or military channels could not accomplish. Over 15 years, we prevented 4 wars, stopped 6 terrorist attacks, and saved thousands of lives through intelligence that was obtained by people who sacrificed their identities to serve their country. And the corruption that led to the recent arrests? Elena's voice remained steady, professional. Project Nightingale succeeded because it operated outside normal oversight channels. That same independence made it vulnerable to abuse by people who put personal gain above national service. The operatives who died were murdered not because they were security risks, but because they were witnesses to crimes committed by their own commanders. The hearing continued for 3 days, Elena's testimony methodically dissecting years of operations that had shaped global events in ways the public never knew. Her evidence was comprehensive, her recollection precise, her conclusions damning for some and vindicating for others. When it was over, Elena walked out of the Capitol building into summer sunshine, breathing air that felt different, somehow cleaner, less weighted with secrets. Maria was waiting for her on the steps, her MIT acceptance letter framed and mounted on a small easel as a reminder of dreams that had survived the nightmare. How does it feel? Maria asked as they walked toward the car. Like I can finally stop. Looking over my shoulder. Elena smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached her eyes. Like we can both stop hiding who we really are. And who are we really? Elena considered the question as they drove through Washington traffic, past monuments to ideals that sometimes required difficult choices to defend. We're people who believe that truth matters more than convenience, that justice matters more than expediency. We're people who think the world can be better if someone is willing to fight for it, even when that fight is dangerous. Especially when it's dangerous, The easy fights don't change anything. That evening, Elena stood in the kitchen of their new apartment, a real home this time. Not a safe house or a cover identity, but a place where they could build a future without fear. Maria was at the table, working on engineering designs for prosthetic limbs that could be controlled by thought alone. Her brilliance was finally free to flourish without the shadow of threats or hidden agendas. Elena's secure phone rang a different one now, connected to legitimate oversight channels rather than shadow networks. General Hawthorne's voice was businesslike but warm. "Colonel, I have a proposition for you. We're rebuilding the intelligence oversight framework from the ground up, based on your recommendations. I'd like you to head the new Ethics and Accountability Division." Elena looked at Maria, who was listening with interest. Her daughter nodded slightly, giving permission for whatever choice Elena wanted to make. What would that involve? Making sure that what happened to Project Nightingale never happens again. Teaching the next generation of intelligence officers that secrecy doesn't mean operating without conscience. Building systems that protect both national security and the people who sacrifice to maintain it. Elena smiled. "General, I accept." The work would be different this time, conducted in offices with windows, overseen by committees with real authority, answerable to people who understood that democracy required vigilance from its defenders. But it would still be service, still be protection, still be the work of making the world safer for people like Maria, to build beautiful things. As Elena began her new career, teaching classes on intelligence ethics and operational accountability, she often thought about the 18 months she had spent as a janitor. Those had been good months in their own way, honest work, simple problems, the satisfaction of leaving things cleaner than she found them. In many ways, her new job wasn't so different. She was still cleaning up after powerful people, still noticing things others missed, still working to make sure that important places functioned the way they were supposed to. The only difference was that now everyone knew she was watching. Dr. Maria Santos, she had legally changed her name back to honor her mother's courage, stood at the podium of MIT's Technology and Ethics Conference, addressing an audience that included some of the brightest minds in engineering, computer science, and artificial intelligence. At 20, she had already published papers on autonomous systems that had changed how the military thought about drone warfare. But today's presentation was personal. "The question we face as engineers," she said, her voice carrying the same quiet authority her mother had once brought to classified briefings, "is not just whether we can build something, but whether we should. Technology without ethics is not progress, it's merely power. And power without accountability has a way of consuming the people who wield it." In the audience, Elena watched her daughter with pride that still sometimes took her breath away. Maria had grown into everything Elena had hoped: brilliant, principled, unafraid to speak truth to power. The prosthetic system she was developing would restore function to veterans who had lost limbs in service. Her work on AI ethics was shaping how autonomous weapons would be regulated, and her research into quantum encryption was providing new ways to protect classified information from the kind of corruption that had nearly destroyed Project Nightingale. After the presentation, they walked across the MIT campus together, past buildings where the future was being invented by people young enough to believe it could be better than the past. "How's the new class coming along?" Maria asked. Elena had been teaching a graduate seminar on intelligence ethics at Georgetown, training the next generation of analysts and operatives. Challenging. They're smart, dedicated, and completely convinced. They know better than everyone who came before them. Elena's smile took any sting out of the words. "Reminds me of someone I know." "Good. Overconfidence is the first step toward the kind of thinking that created this mess in the first place." Maria paused by a bench overlooking the Charles River. "Do you ever miss it? The operational work?" Elena considered the question seriously. "I miss the clarity. When you're in the field, the mission parameters are usually clear: protect this person, Gather this information. Stop this threat. Oversight work is more complicated. Everything exists in gray areas where good people can disagree about the right choice. But you don't want to go back? No, that work was important, but it was also consuming. It required me to become other people so completely that I sometimes forgot who I really was. Now I get to be myself all the time. That's worth more than I realized. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from Jason Coughlin, who was now heading security for a private foundation that provided support to retired intelligence operatives. The message was simple but significant. Package delivered safely. Another former operative had been successfully transitioned to a new life, with psychological support, financial assistance, and the kind of community that helped people rebuild their identities after years in the shadows. It was part of Elena's lasting legacy, a recognition that the people who served in the darkness deserved more than abandonment when their service ended. The Elena Santos Foundation for Intelligence veterans had become a model for how democratic societies could honor their shadow warriors without compromising operational security. 5 years later, Colonel Patricia Chenshi had been promoted twice. Since the Nightingale investigation stood in the same communication center where Elena Santos had once revealed her true identity. The room looked different now, with better lighting, more open sightlines, and technology that made the old systems look primitive. But more importantly, it felt different. The culture of secrecy that had enabled corruption had been replaced by one of accountability and oversight. Shane was briefing a new class of communication specialists, young officers who would coordinate intelligence operations around the world. But unlike previous generations, they were being trained with a clear understanding that their work served democracy, not the ambitions of individual officials. The most important lesson you can learn, Chun told her students, is that secrecy is a tool, not a goal. We keep information classified to protect sources, methods, and ongoing operations. We do not keep it classified to protect careers, cover up mistakes, or hide illegal activities. The moment secrecy becomes an end in itself, it becomes corruption. One of the students raised her hand. Major, what about situations where exposing the truth could compromise national security? Chun smiled, remembering when she had asked Elena Santos a similar question. That's when you have to decide whether you're serving your country or serving the people who claim to speak for it. Sometimes those are different things. The courage to make that distinction is what separates intelligence officers from intelligence bureaucrats. After the class, Chun made her way to the memorial wall that had been installed in the lobby of the communication center. Etched in black granite were the names of intelligence operatives who had died in service to their country, including the 3 Project Nightingale assets who had been murdered by their own colleagues. Their deaths had not been in vain. They had become the catalyst for reforms that protected thousands of other operatives from similar fates. 7 years later, General Elena Santos, she had been recalled to active duty at her own request, with promotion to flag rank reflecting both her service record and her contribution to intelligence reform, stood in the Oval Office, briefing the president on global security threats. The conversation was remarkably different from the shadow briefings that had characterized intelligence work for decades. Every operation was documented, every decision subject to oversight, every action accountable to democratic institutions. Madam President, Elena said, consulting her briefing materials, our intelligence indicates that the terrorist cell in Somalia is planning an attack on civilian targets in 3 weeks. We have assets in place who can prevent it, but the operation will require coordination with local authorities and NATO allies. What are the risks to our people? Moderate. The primary risk is exposure of our intelligence network if the operation fails. However, our new protocols ensure that no single operative has enough information to compromise the entire network if captured. Approved. Keep me informed of developments. Elena left the White House feeling something she had rarely experienced. During her active years, complete confidence that her work served legitimate purposes through accountable channels. The shadow wars still existed, but they were now fought by people who understood that democracy required its defenders to remain committed to democratic values. That evening, she called Maria, who was now Dr. Maria Santos, director of MIT's Ethics in Technology Institute and a consultant to the United Nations on artificial intelligence governance. "How did the briefing go?" Maria asked. "Clean, straightforward, properly authorized. Everything a briefing should be." Elena paused, looking out at the lights of Washington. "I keep waiting for it to feel normal, but it still surprises me how much easier this work is when you don't have to lie about it. Maybe that's good. Maybe we should never stop being surprised when things work the way they're supposed to." Elena Santos stood before a joint session of Congress, delivering what would be her final official briefing as Director of Intelligence Oversight. At 57, she was retiring for the second time, but this retirement felt different, earned rather than forced, chosen rather than imposed. "Over the past decade," she told the assembled lawmakers, "we have rebuilt America's intelligence apparatus on a foundation of accountability, transparency, and respect for democratic institutions. We have prevented terrorism, thwarted hostile intelligence operations, and maintained our competitive edge in global affairs, all while operating within the constraints of law and democratic oversight." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The reforms we have implemented have been tested in crisis and proven effective in practice. Most importantly, they have restored public trust in institutions that must operate in secrecy but remain answerable to the people they serve. Representative Johnson from the Intelligence Committee raised his hand. "Director Santos, what would you say to critics who argue that these oversight mechanisms have made us less effective protecting national security?" Elena's response was measured but firm. "I would remind them that effectiveness without legitimacy is not strength, it's tyranny with better public relations. Intelligence operations that violate democratic principles do not protect democracy. They destroy it from within. Our job is not just to keep America safe, but to keep America America." The applause that followed was not perfunctory, but genuine recognition from elected officials that the woman standing before them had helped save not just lives, but the integrity of democratic institutions themselves. After the session, Elena walked down the steps of the Capitol building one final time as a government official. Maria was waiting for her, no longer the frightened 17-year-old who had learned her mother's secrets in a single terrifying night, but a confident woman whose own work was shaping how humanity would navigate the ethical challenges of an increasingly technological world. "So what's next?" Maria asked as they walked toward the car. "I was thinking about teaching. Real teaching this time. High school students who are just starting to think about how they want to serve their communities." Elena smiled. "Maybe even some janitorial work. I always found that satisfying." "Mama, you realize that after everything you've accomplished, everything you've built, people are going to think you're crazy for wanting to go back to cleaning buildings." Elena laughed, the sound carrying years of hard-won peace. "Let them think what they want. I've learned that the most important work often looks like nothing special from the outside. What matters is knowing that when you finish, you've left things better than you found them." 15 years later, the retirement ceremony for Principal Elena Santos of Roosevelt High School was held in the same gymnasium where she had taught civics classes for the past 5 years. The students, faculty, and community members who packed the space represented a different kind of achievement than the classified commendations that filled her official service record. These were people whose lives had been shaped by her commitment to education, civic engagement, and the radical idea that democracy worked best when its citizens understood both their rights and their responsibilities. Maria, now 42 and the mother of 2 children who called Elena Abuela, delivered the keynote address. Her own career had evolved from engineering to policy, and she now served as a senior advisor to the United Nations on emerging technology governance. But tonight, she was simply a daughter honoring her mother's legacy. "My mother taught me that. Service takes many forms," Maria said, her voice carrying to every corner of the gymnasium. "Sometimes it means carrying secrets that could change the world. Sometimes it means exposing those secrets when they threaten the world you're trying to protect. And sometimes it means teaching teenagers about the Constitution on a Tuesday morning, helping them understand that democracy is not a spectator sport." Elena listened from the front row, surrounded by former students who had gone on to become teachers, engineers, public servants, and engaged citizens. These were her true legacy, not the classified operations or the intelligence reforms, but the young people who understood that their choices mattered, that their voices counted, that democracy required active participation from every generation. After the ceremony, Elena stood alone in her empty classroom, looking at the bulletin board where she had posted the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and a simple sign that read, "Question authority. Think critically. Serve others." The same principles that had guided her through 30 years of intelligence work now shaped how she taught 17-year-old students to navigate an increasingly complex world. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jason Coughlin, now in his 70s, but still running the foundation that supported retired operatives. "Saw the news coverage of your retirement. Proud of you, Colonel. See you at the reunion?" Elena smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it. Time to celebrate the fact that we all made it to old age." The Project Nightingale Survivors Reunion was held annually now, a gathering of people who had served in shadows but lived to see daylight. They were teachers, consultants, small business owners, grandparents, ordinary people who had once been extraordinary, now finding meaning in lives that no longer required false identities or constant vigilance. 20 years later, Dr. Maria Santos stood at the podium of the Global Technology Ethics Council, addressing representatives from 53 nations about the governance of artificial intelligence systems that were becoming more sophisticated every year. At 57, the same age her mother had been when she retired from government service, Maria carried the same quiet authority that had made Elena Santos legendary in intelligence circles. "The question before us," Maria said, "is not whether these systems will reshape human society. That transformation is already underway. The question is whether we will guide that transformation according to human values, or whether we will simply hope for the best while powerful technologies develop beyond our ability to control them." In the audience, Elena listened with the pride of a mother and the perspective of someone who had spent her career understanding how unchecked power could corrupt even the best intentions. At 77, she was officially retired from everything except being Maria's most trusted advisor and her grandchildren's favorite storyteller. The work continued, as it always had, the eternal human project of building institutions that serve justice while remaining accountable to the people they claim to protect. Maria's generation faced challenges that Elena's could never have imagined: autonomous weapons systems, global surveillance networks, artificial intelligence that could manipulate information faster than humans could verify it. But the fundamental principles remained the same: transparency, accountability, and the courage to speak truth to power. After the session, Elena and Maria walked through Geneva's old town, past buildings that had witnessed centuries of human struggle for justice and dignity. The work was never finished. Elena reflected, each generation had to learn anew that freedom required vigilance, that democracy demanded participation, that the price of security was not liberty, but rather the wisdom to distinguish between protecting citizens and controlling them. "Do you think we made a difference?" Maria asked as they paused by Lake Geneva, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. Elena considered the question seriously. We made the difference we could make with the tools we had in the time we were given. The rest is up to the people who come after us. And if they make different choices, if they forget the lessons we tried to teach, then they'll have to learn those lessons again, probably the hard way. But that's not our failure, that's just humanity. Each generation has to earn its own wisdom. As they walked back toward their hotel, Elena's mind wandered to the classified files that still bore her name, the operations that would remain secret. For decades to come, the lives that had been saved by decisions made in rooms, the public would never see. That work had mattered, but it was not the work she was most proud of. Her proudest achievement was sitting beside her on a park bench, reading bedtime stories to two children who would grow up in a world where artificial intelligence was commonplace, where global communication was instant, where the challenges of governance required wisdom that no single generation could provide alone. But they would also grow up knowing that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences, that courage was often quiet, and that the most important victories were usually invisible to everyone except the people they protected. The memorial service for Elena Santos was held not in Arlington National Cemetery, where her military service would have earned her a place among heroes, but in the chapel of Roosevelt High School, where she had spent her final working years, teaching civics to teenagers who rarely appreciated how remarkable their teacher really was. Maria, now in her 60s and showing the first signs of the gray hair that had marked her mother's transition from operative to ordinary citizen, delivered the eulogy to a gathering that spanned decades and continents. Former students sat beside retired intelligence officers, congressional representatives next to janitors, technology executives next to teachers. It was exactly the kind of democratic gathering that Elena Santos had spent her life protecting and promoting. My mother lived 3 different lives, Maria said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. As Colonel Elena Santos, she served her country in ways that will never be fully known or properly acknowledged. As Principal Santos, she served her community by teaching young people that democracy is not an inheritance, but a responsibility. And as Abuela Elena, she served her family by showing us that heroism is not about dramatic gestures, but about daily choices to do what is right, even when it is difficult. She used to tell me that the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with ideas, not in distant places, but in the hearts and minds of ordinary people who have to decide every day whether they will be citizens or subjects, whether they will serve justice or merely serve power. Jason Coughlin, now 87 and one of the last surviving members of the original Project Nightingale team, stood to offer his own remembrance. Elena Santos was the best of us because she never forgot that our mission was not to accumulate power but to protect the people who could never fight back. She turned intelligence work from a game of shadows into a profession of service. That may be her greatest legacy. General Chun, now retired herself and serving as a professor of strategic studies, added her own tribute. Elena Santos proved that transparency and security are not opposing forces but complementary strengths. She showed us that democratic institutions don't make intelligence work impossible, they make it necessary. After the service, as the chapel emptied and the afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, Maria found herself alone with her thoughts and her mother's memory. Elena Santos had died peacefully in her sleep at 82, surrounded by children and grandchildren who knew her as a woman, who made the world's best pancakes and told the most interesting bedtime stories, but who only gradually came to understand that their grandmother had once been one of the most influential people in the global intelligence community. The official obituaries would mention her military service, her role in intelligence reform, her years as an educator. But they would not capture the essential truth about Elena Santos. She had been a woman who understood that real security came not from the ability to keep secrets, but from the wisdom to know when secrets needed to be revealed. As Maria locked the chapel and walked to her car, she passed the building's main entrance, where a simple bronze plaque had been installed the day after Elena's retirement, in honor of Elena Santos, Principal 2019 to 2024, who taught us that the greatest service is helping others discover their own capacity for greatness. It was, Maria thought, exactly the kind of memorial her mother would have wanted understated, focused on others and completely honest about what mattered most. 30 years later, Dr. James Santos Maria's son and Elena's grandson stood before the Senate Intelligence Committee, taking the same oath his grandmother had taken decades earlier. At 35, he was being confirmed as the director of the newly created Office of Democratic Intelligence Oversight, a position that existed because Elena Santos had proven that accountability and effectiveness were not mutually exclusive. Dr. Santos, the committee chairman said, "Your grandmother's reforms fundamentally changed how this country conducts intelligence operations. In your opinion, have those changes made us safer or less safe?" James considered the question with the same thoughtfulness that had characterized 3 generations of Santos family service. "Senator, I believe those changes have made us more safe, because they have ensured that our intelligence apparatus serves democratic values rather than undermining them. When intelligence operations violate the principles they claim to protect, they create more threats than they neutralize. And how do you plan to continue that legacy?" "By remembering that oversight is not opposition. My job is not to prevent intelligence operations, but to ensure that they are conducted by people who remember that they serve the American people, not the other way around." After his confirmation, James visited his grandmother's grave in the small cemetery outside Alexandria where Elena Santos had chosen to be buried. The headstone was simple granite, bearing only her name, dates, and a single line, "She left things better than she found them." James knelt and placed a small American flag beside the grave, a tradition he had maintained every year since Elena's death. As he stood to leave, he noticed an elderly man approaching with his own small flag. Jason Coughlin, now 92 and still honoring the woman who had saved his life and countless others through her courage and wisdom. "She would have been proud," Jason said quietly, looking toward the Capitol building visible in the distance. "She would have been worried," James replied with a smile. "She never trusted anyone who thought they had all the answers, especially people related to her. Smart woman. That's why she lived long enough to become a grandmother." Jason placed his flag beside James's, and for a moment they stood together in comfortable silence, 2 generations united by their connection to a woman who had proven that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things without losing their humanity. As they walked back toward their cars, James asked the question that had been on his mind since his confirmation hearing. "Mr. Coughlin, do you think the reforms will last, or will the next crisis tempt people to go back to the old ways?" Jason paused, considering his words carefully. "That depends on whether each generation learns the lessons your grandmother tried to teach. Democracy is not a machine that runs itself, it's a garden that requires constant tending. The moment people stop paying attention, weeds start growing. And if the weeds do grow, then someone else will have to do what Elena did: pull them up, replant what matters, and hope the next generation learns to tend the garden better." Jason smiled. "That's the thing about Elena's legacy. It's not a monument that stands forever. It's a responsibility that gets passed down. Every generation has to earn it again." As James drove back to Washington to begin his new role, he carried with him the weight of that responsibility and the inspiration of knowing that others had borne it successfully before him. Elena Santos had started as a woman hiding in plain sight, cleaning up after powerful people while secretly watching for signs of corruption. She had ended as a teacher, passing on the wisdom that democracy required active citizenship from every generation. The work continued, as it always had and always would, the eternal human project of building a world where power served justice, where secrets protected people rather than protecting power, and where ordinary individuals could make extraordinary differences by simply refusing to accept that things had to be the way they were. In the end, Elena Santos had achieved something rarer than any military decoration or intelligence commendation. She had lived long enough to see that her work mattered, that her sacrifices had meaning, and that the world her granddaughter and great-grandchildren would inherit was genuinely better than the one she had found when she first swore an oath to defend it. The last line of her personal journal, found after her death, captured the essence of her philosophy. I was never the hero of any story. I was just someone who decided that the story needed to end differently and was willing to do the work to make that happen. The real heroes are the people who continue that work after I'm gone. It was exactly what the world needed to remember about Elena Santos, not that she was extraordinary, but that extraordinary things could be accomplished by ordinary people who refused to accept that injustice was inevitable.